Wagner wasn't using these strange creatures from the Teutonic twilight as a form of escapism. On the contrary, he chose myths and legends that he felt contained universal truths that were highly relevant to his own society. It's no accident that the central plot of The Ring revolves around the disastrous consequences of the greed for power and wealth. At its most basic level, the Ring cycle is a full-on socialist allegory. To Wagner and many of his contemporaries, industrial capitalism was the evil at the heart of society, a dark, fearsome machine that enriched the few but enslaved the many.
The power and anger of much of The Ring reflects this oppressive and foreboding image of industrial might. In the first opera of the cycle, the Rheingold were taken down into the sweaty depths of a menacing and fiery mine.
The mine was a metaphor for capitalism. The dwarfs, giants and gods who've abused the Ring's power stood for the real-life exploiters of humanity. At the very end of the Ring cycle, the home of the gods, Valhalla, is razed to the ground in a cataclysmic firestorm. The old order is destroyed, and now mankind can start a new, glorious future based on humanity and love instead of greed and power. But in 1854, just after Wagner finished the text of the Ring cycle, and before he started work on the music, he read a book that was to turn his thinking about politics, indeed about more or less everything, completely on its head. This is Wagner's home, Wahnfried, in the southern German town of Bayreuth. Inside is Wagner's own copy of the work that was to have such a devastating impact on him.
We're often told that this book will change your life. Well, in Wagner's case, that's no exaggeration. Remarkably, the biggest single influence on The Ring was not a poet, not a composer, but a philosopher, the German author Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer's book was The World as Will and Representation, and when Wagner read it at the age of 40, it caused something of a midlife crisis for him, and it affected everything he wrote until the day he died.
In Schopenhauer, Wagner had encountered one of the world's great miserabilists. The philosopher's pessimistic musings were to have a huge effect on the completion of The Ring.
Schopenhauer's theories, like Wagner's operas, are somewhat short on gags and hard to summarize briefly, but the idea that caught Wagner's imagination was that we humans are essentially irrational, desiring, emotional animals. All efforts to reform or control us are therefore pointless. According to Schopenhauer, our sexuality, our cravings, our longings totally dominate our minds, and since our appetites can never be satisfied, we're always projecting our happiness into the future. We're always getting ready to live.
Schopenhauer elevated pessimism to a philosophical principle. On reading Schopenhauer, Wagner was so shaken that he immediately broke off from the Ring cycle and wrote an opera, Tristan and Isolde, to bring the idea to the stage.
Two lovers who are forbidden to be together in life can only be united in death. Unlike tragic Romeo and Juliet, who accidentally kill themselves, Tristan and Isolde are meant to die, so they can finally end their unbearable unhappiness. Misery, Wagner followed Schopenhauer in thinking, is the human condition, and death is the only solution. Well, I told you it wasn't a bundle of laughs.
Wagner embraced Schopenhauer's book with passionate enthusiasm, reading it 4 times in the first year he encountered it. But what should he now do about the ring cycle, the text of which, but none of the music, had already been completed? According to Schopenhauer, political reform, along with every other human activity, was pointless, and nothing could ever change for the better. But this view ran counter to the whole thrust of the ring as written.
He agonized over the idea of rewriting, but believe it or not, in the end he left the text pretty much as it was.
Wagner decided to reflect Schopenhauer's theories about human existence in the music itself.
Together with Wagner's great opera Tristan and Isolde, the ring cycle is an attempt to express a philosophy of life through music. But how could the music, rather than the words and the story, express a philosophical idea? Well, in his ambitious attempt to translate the theories of Schopenhauer into music, Wagner began dismantling the way that harmony had previously been used. If that sounds radical, it was. Music was never the same again.
(1874) was the year in which the modern age in music began. In the 19th century, composers decided to add more variety to the musical recipe.
In all music, you have the choice of simple chords or complicated ones. And the simple ones are made up of 3 basic notes or ingredients, like the egg, flour and milk in a pancake recipe. But just as with pancakes, you can add other, more exciting notes or toppings to the basic mixture. Every time you add a note, it thickens the texture and enhances and complicates the overall flavour. And a bit more chocolate. Delicious. Clearly, what these chords give to the music is a kind of juiciness and syrupiness, just what the high cholesterol ingredients give to the crepe. Musicians couldn't resist giving these tricksy, sophisticated chords portentous names like augmented sixth, diminished ninth, or dominant seventh. Now, whilst composers of the 16th, 17th and 18th centuries knew about these chords, by and large they used them very sparingly. Mozart and Haydn would have considered these harmonies like death by chocolate, far too much to take, and they would have stuck to more neutral ingredients. But as the 19th century dawned, so did the Romantic era, and death by chocolate became the fashion. But it's important to realize that Wagner's contemporaries, like Tchaikovsky and Brahms, only indulged in occasional bouts of this kind of naughtiness.